Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chicago White Sox March to October. Today is the end of regular season recap. So we're going to look through how everything stacked up here at the end of the year. We're going to go through all the standings, and then we're going to go through all of our players' stats. And if you guys aren't new to my March to October series, you know I like to go in depth with the stats and I spend way too much time, so this is going to be a long one. So buckle up. But before we go into recapping anything, the first thing I want to point out is if you remember back to the last episode, we had our 2 September call-ups. It was Dylan Bundy on the pitching side and then Colson Montgomery on offense. They were both an 80 overall, so my prediction was that they were both going to be left on the playoff roster and somebody was going to end up getting the boot. And I was half right. So let's talk about the lineup first, because they did leave Colson Montgomery on the playoff roster, and he actually managed to get up to an 81 at the last second. But the person that they got rid of, and this is really the kind of thing that is just, it's grinding my gears on March to October, is the CPU just does things in situations like this, because the person they sent down is Gavin Sheets. Gavin Sheets is a starter. Anytime we face righties, Gavin Sheets starts. He had a really good year. There's no reason for him to be taken off the playoff roster. See, I don't know. I'm thinking about making a video going in depth of like what I like about March to October and what can be changed and stuff, and that's one of the top things is I'd really like to see more control over the roster, because, well, for one, I might not have even left Colson Montgomery on the playoff roster, but if I did, I would have chosen to send somebody else down, like maybe Barnhart or even Angle, or I don't know, just not Sheets, because that move doesn't make any sense. And then on the pitching side of things, it wasn't even Dylan Bundy that stayed up anyway. It was Christian Javier getting his first call-up of the entire season. And then it was Jesus Luzardo that got sent down. At this point, I would not have wanted Christian Javier up in the big leagues, especially over Luzardo. Luzardo has been a pretty good option for us out of the pen. And Javier, now he's only a 74, because actually you can't see it now because they don't show AAA stats anymore, but they kind of ruined him. You see that -10 in his hits per 9, and that's because they decided to have him be a starter in AAA all season. So it was like the problems we were having with Kopech as a starter, but just amplified because Christian Javier has even less stamina. So he took a huge hit to his hits per 9 now. He's down to a 74. I still like pitching with him though, so like maybe if there's a situation where we can use them, that wouldn't be too bad. But yeah, that's what our playoff roster looks like, those two guys coming up out of nowhere. So now let's look at where everyone finished in the standings this year. Obviously we won our division. We won by plenty, 36 games up on second place. It really helps that nobody else went 500 in the division. But I think the craziest part is the fact that we went 60-16 in our division. I mean, I know with everyone else being a below 500 team, we should have dominated the division, but I feel like that is just a whole different level. Then if we look at the AL East, it was the Rays that hung on to win that division with 94 wins. The Blue Jays, their team ranking actually dropped all the way down to 5th. I think they were 3rd going into the season and for most of the season, but the Rays just managed to stay out front all year, and then no one else finished over 500. I thought the Yankees would have been a little bit better this year. I thought they improved a bit, but I guess not enough. And then the AL West, the Mariners won. They fended off the Astros. The Astros still made the playoffs though in the wild card, because we saw that was our first matchup. And then the Rangers, man, they just could never get it back. They started out for the first probably 40-ish games in first place, and then they fell off. The Angels, I think they made the playoffs, right? Last season. I feel like I should know this off the top of my head, but I think the Angels made the playoffs in the last season, and they finish under 500. The wild card, it was the Astros and the Blue Jays. We already know the Astros won though, because that's who we're facing. Over to the National League, you got the Marlins winning their division with 88 wins. The Braves, wow, I haven't looked at this yet, so this is all the first time I'm seeing it. I remember when we checked up on the standings with about a month to go, I think the Braves were like 5 or 6 games back and they were looking like they were making a surge. But look at the Marlins and look at how it finished too. If you look at the last 10 games, the Braves actually took the lead. So with not too much time to go, the Braves managed to get into first place, which they should have. I mean, they're ranked second. They're the best team behind us in the entire MLB in terms of like player overalls and stuff. But then they must, I don't know what happened at the end. They go 5-5. The Marlins go 8-2 and win the division by a game. The Phillies, man, they finished 20 games under 500. But then the Mets, look at the Mets. That was our World Series matchup last season. It was us, the White Sox versus the Mets in the World Series. And look at how they came back the next year, 65-97. And not even that, but their team ranking is 26th. So it's not like they even underperformed. They were just never meant to be good. In the NL Central, the Cardinals did end up winning the division. Wow. I think, weren't the Brewers ahead of them? Like all year, once the Brewers overtook the Cubs, it was the Brewers. But then the Cardinals, I don't know, they must have made a push there at the end and took it. The Cubs finished at 500, so they couldn't get back to where they were at the start of the year. Wow, and I did not even realize the Cardinals were this good. Or if I did realize, I forgot. They're the 4th ranked team in the league. And then in the West, the Padres barely managed to win, and it looks like a very similar situation to the Marlins and Braves, because Padres only won it by 1 game, but look at the streak. Padres won 5 in a row, Dodgers lost 4 in a row. So going into the end there, the Dodgers actually had a significant lead. I don't know if my math checks out, but they probably blew like a 3-game lead. They're probably 3 games up. I wonder if like the last series of the year was Padres Dodgers. That would have been electric if that was like a real life situation. But man, the Padres though, they kind of fell off though. I'm not gonna lie. They were the ones keeping pace with us at the beginning of the year. We got off to such a hot start. We never really were mediocre. We always had a crazy winning percentage. And at like the halfway point, or maybe like 60-ish, 70 games in, the Padres were actually like slightly better than us. And they finished almost 20 games below us. So that looked like who we were destined to face in the playoff or in the World Series, but now it's not so clear. And I guess, I don't know. I said the AL was mediocre, but I guess the NL is even more mediocre and tightly packed together. You had no 100 win teams and no 100 loss teams. So then what has gone on in the postseason so far, just to see? So it was the Brewers beat the Dodgers in the wild card game, and now that series is tied at 1. It's Miami versus St. Louis, and Miami's got a 2-game lead. So if we make it to the World Series, we're going to see a new matchup, a pretty fun matchup, besides the Cardinals. I just don't like the Cardinals, man. On our side, though, it's a little bit the same because, you know, we've faced the Astros plenty before in March to Octobers. We faced the Mariners last year in the ALCS. We've never faced the Rays, though, so if they win, that'll be a new matchup. But yeah, that entire NL, besides the Dodgers, but they already lost. That's like a shakeup of the normal. Actually, I guess the Cardinals were probably in it before. They just never made it to the World Series or anything. All right, so now we get to move on and talk about our players' stats. I'm going to start with the pitching, and I guess we'll start with Ohtani. We can talk about him as like 2 separate players. So for now, we'll just talk about his pitching. His attributes are pretty much the same. I saw a little bit of regression from him, I think because of the age, which is a little worrying since we signed him for 4 more years after this. But you could make the case he had his best pitching season. I mean, ever since this March to October started, he's been pitching every game because there's no injuries in March to October. This year, he pitched 4 less innings, gave up like 20 more hits, couple more runs, but a lot less homers, cut down on the walks, actually got 1 extra strikeout in fewer innings. So like, just from the eye test, it'd be tough to decide which of these 2 seasons was better. But I mean, if you look at the WAR, this season was better by a full win. I mean, it's not too drastic of an improvement, but a better better strikeouts per 9, a lower walks per 9, and a lower home run per 9. Put that all together, and I guess that is a pretty significant upgrade to last season. So Ohtani definitely is worth the money, even if he was just a pitcher, but he's not. We all know that. He won 20 games too. I didn't even really recognize that. He has to be in Cy Young contention. I don't know who else in the league has done crazy, so I don't know, but he's got to be in Cy Young contention. And I mean, see, this is what I do. I'm already spending a lot of time when we're only one player into looking at stats. But last year, if you look at Ohtani's season from last year, this is his pitching year, Cy Young worthy year. Hitting wise, he goes off over 300 average, over or just under 1,000 OPS, 30 bombs. But Eloy won the MVP over him. So I feel like this game doesn't know yet how to factor in the whole pitching and hitting thing into the MVP award. So I can't say that even though he should be the MVP pretty clear cut, I can't just assume that he will be. Moving on to Luis Severino, look at the improvement he had. In his age 30 season, he goes up a couple overall to realize that A potential. And he had such a similar season to last year, which that's another thing, is like, he won the Cy Young last year with these numbers. I mean, that's another thing. Go back and look at Ohtani. With the numbers Ohtani had just on the mound versus Severino, wouldn't you think Ohtani would have won the Cy Young? I don't understand how that happened. Severino also won 20 games this year, 2 years in a row, threw for the exact same amount of innings, the exact same amount of hits allowed. He allowed 2 less homers, but 2 more walks, 5 less earned runs, but actually more runs overall. Wow, he didn't allow an unearned run last year. And yeah, they give him pretty much the same wins above replacement as last year. I would say it's a slight improvement on the year before just because of the lower ERA, but really it's identical. He's been a good signing for us because look at how cheap he is. We only spent $12 million on this guy. And then Dylan Cease, our 3rd highest overall starter, up to an 89 this year. He's getting close to realizing that A potential, and he finally had a really good season from start to finish. I'm upset he didn't finish with that ERA under 3. I thought he was going to do that, but he must have had a rough start or two at the end. He goes 15-7. He throws 224 innings, cuts down on his hits allowed, cuts down on his runs allowed, gets 10 more strikeouts while walking 10 more guys. It's all, I mean, based on just the numbers, it's kind of like the last two where it's like he didn't improve too much on the season before. It's really only the hits allowed that probably translates to fewer runs allowed, but it's definitely an improvement. He definitely had a better year. I don't really get how the WAR stayed the same. Must all come down to the walks per 9 being higher. And then German Marquez, our new signing of the offseason, and he was basically, I was going to say he was basically our Luis Severino signing of this year, but he might have even been better. He improves at already a B potential. He goes up to an 88. He was either an 85 or 86 when we signed him. We're paying him even less money than Severino, and look at the year he put together, a sub 3 ERA. He was insane to start the year. He kind of middled out as it went on, but he still throws about 230 innings, gives up 200 hits, and look at the difference between playing here in Chicago versus playing in Colorado. Look at how many fewer home runs he allowed. He allows 42 bombs last year, cuts it down to 17. That is crazy. And the strikeouts were there out of nowhere. I was not expecting him to be a high strikeout guy. Still didn't have like a 9 strikeout per 9. Didn't strike out one guy an inning, but that's a pretty big improvement still. Obviously, the ERA comes down a lot when you don't give up those homers. He had 4 complete game shutouts, 6 wins above replacement. So actually, does that make him, or was Shohei? Did he have a higher? Yeah, he had a slightly higher WAR. So second best pitcher on our team in terms of wins above replacement value. And then our last starter, Tariq Skubal, traded for him slightly before the halfway point of the year. And honestly, I am very happy with this trade the longer it is from making the trade. Because look at the improvement he has to his attributes. We traded for him at an 80. He's up to an 83. He's still only 27, so he's got a lot of time to get a lot better. He didn't have like a crazy year or anything. It seemed very up and down after getting traded to us. I think his ERA might have been actually this exact number when we traded for him. At one point, it got like all the way down to like 340, and then it got back up to here, and then it got down again. So there's nothing really for me to be critical about. I mean, he was our 5th starter, so that's the first thing you got to keep in mind. It was also also his first time starting games in a year and a half once we got him. And I say he did fine. I mean, sure, the home run numbers are higher. Well, that's also because he pitched more innings, so I guess they're probably about equal. The ERA isn't much better. Finishes with 2.5 WAR. Yeah, the homers are pretty much the same. Cut the walk rate down a lot and improved on the strikeout rate. I'm more excited to see what he can do as we move on, because he is probably going to overtake Michael Kopech's overall, because between last season and this season, I think we've learned 85 is where he tops out. But talking about the season he had, I should have actually calculated his final bullpen ERA versus his starter ERA. But he definitely improved on being a starter, because I think he was like 5.59 when we took him out of that starter role. Now he's got that ERA down to 4.42. When I checked in on it with about a month or so to go, he had like an even 3 ERA since moving to the pen, and I think his overall ERA is about the same now. But yeah, I think we've learned that this is definitely the move to have him in the bullpen as a long reliever. He's still going to get a lot of work. He'll probably throw close to 100 innings on a full season in the pen. And now that we have Skubal, we don't really need to feel bad about having him in the bullpen at all. He can just be a good reliever for us. Finishes with a 13-5 record. The WAR is a little lower, probably because for whatever reason, actually, his FIP went up. That was the one thing that kind of indicated what was going on, is 2.5 years in a row, his FIP was miles below his real ERA. But that makes sense if you think he goes 5 scoreless, allowing like 1 hit and 1 walk in those 5 innings, but then that 6th inning comes out and allows 3 runs on 3 hits. It's still a 4 hit and 1 walk day in 6 innings, but then, all 3 of those runs or more, if he had a worse day, come at the end without allowing a lot of hits. That's just my hypothesis of what went on with him. Then we got Johnny Lasagna here to talk about, and look at him. He improved too. 29 years old, got a couple overall better. He did not have as good of a season though as the year before, which we're going to see a lot of from here on out, talking about the bullpen and then the position players. But in about the same amount of work, gave up 10 more hits, 5 more earned runs. I don't know. It's tough to judge because he only got 27 innings of work, but that's just kind of how March to October goes, especially when you have good starters like we do. The game just leaves them in, so there's not a lot of innings to get eaten up by the pen. So yeah, he definitely had a worse year, but with only 27 innings, that could come down to 1 worse outing, and all of a sudden his ERA on the year is 2 runs higher. Then we go to Aaron Bummer. He also improved a little bit more in his age 30 season. He got, still not a ton of work out of the pen, but compared to what the game gave him the last couple of years, it's like double, especially from last year. He gave up, a couple more runs. Still really good, still an ERA under 2, but definitely not quite as good as his limited work last year. Then we go to Graveman, who started the year pretty good, then got progressively worse, but then seemed to finish the year somewhat strong because that ERA was creeping up near 5. He finishes at 4.17. Got some of the most work that anyone got out of the bullpen. 54 innings, exactly 54 strikeouts. Gave up more homers. Probably cut the walk rate down a bit though. Strikeout rate fell. So yeah, he wasn't as strong as last year, but that's how everyone was. We had, I think, if you get rid of Javier and then count from anyone below Kopech, everyone in our bullpen last year had an ERA under 2, and this year none of them did. Well, I guess except Bummer. But we don't really, we don't have any stats to talk about Javier. So we'll move on to Crochet. Another disappointment for me personally. Don't really want him giving up an ERA of 4.34 like that, because he's supposed to be the closer as soon as next year. But he pitched 29 innings. I feel like his usage went down as the year went on. He started out really good. He started out giving up like no runs, striking out everybody and walking nobody. But it seems like he just started giving up more hits. Still didn't walk a ton of people. Strikeout numbers were good. Yeah, look at that. 12 strikeouts per 9. That is what you want to see out of Garrett Crochet. It's just the hits that need to be cut down on. And then Taylor Rogers, talk about low usage. He threw like 1 inning since June, July, and the only reason he threw that inning is because I decided to throw an inning with him. He was really solid a season ago, and for whatever reason, he was just the guy the game decided not to use this year. So there's really nothing to talk about. Good thing we're paying him $14 million. That comes down to what? We paid Taylor Rogers $2 million per inning pitched. That's not cool. And then we move on to Liam Hendriks. And what do you say about him? Because I feel like all year, all I did was complain about how he played. He wasn't as dominant as normal. We all saw it. He decreased in overall all the way down to an 88. But when you look at the season he had, is there really that much to complain about? I mean, if we were to just like have simulated the year and saw these numbers, we would probably look at it like, okay, he got a little worse, but he was probably still one of, if not the best closer. But as we were playing, it was just like every game was just like a struggle to get those last 3 outs with him. But I mean, look at his numbers. He gets 50 saves for the first time in his career. He blew 1 less save than the year before in a lot more chances. He only gave up 41 hits in 56 innings and then only 8 walks to go with it, so his whip is well under 1. The strikeout rate was definitely down, but he still struck out a lot of guys. The only thing that made his year bad, or not even bad, I don't know why I said bad, but made his year worse, was he started giving up home runs. Just out of nowhere. 10 home runs this year. He didn't even give up that many in the first 2 years combined. Everything else between those first 2 years and this year is like very similar. It was just those home runs that gave him trouble. So yeah, I don't know. For most of the year after the beginning, because that's another thing I forgot to mention, is his first like 18 or so innings, he didn't allow a run. But after that, and after he started allowing runs, I couldn't help but think, did we mess up by offering him a contract? Are we overpaying? Are we wasting money because we're paying him 24 mil for this year and next year? But then you look at these end of year stats and it's like, no, he's probably worth it. And then we'll go ahead and look at our one last guy that got work in our bullpen that got demoted for the playoffs, but it's Luzardo. He finally had a year where he got better in overall. I feel like last year, even though he did really well, his overall didn't really improve. But this year he's up to a 77. We've got him for 1 more year under contract. After this one, it'll be interesting what he ends up doing, or what I end up doing with him. 72 innings out of the bullpen. His usage definitely went down though once Kopech moved to the bullpen, and he did fine. I mean, just kind of middle of the road as far as I'm concerned. Solid ERA. I mean, long reliever. I feel like this is kind of exactly what you want out of a long reliever. So now we can move on to the offense, but basically I could say one blanket statement and we could be done talking about it. And that blanket statement could just be everyone did good, but they all did worse than last year. I mean, I promise you, I'm going to say that about everybody that we talk about who was on our team last year. So we'll start where the lineup starts with Trey Turner. He didn't really progress or regress by the end of the year. And actually, he found his home run swing in the last month or so, because I think it was about the halfway point. He was only at 6 home runs or 7 or somewhere around there. So it was like, even if he doubled that, he'd still be at only half of his home runs of this year. But he found that home run swing. He got up to 22 bombs. He had 10 triples. That slugging percentage ended up not too far below last year. The average got better. The on base got better. So like, if he's getting on base more, there's not a whole lot to complain about with him as a leadoff hitter. I mean, he walked less, but he also struck out less, so that kind of cancels out for me. I mean, he still drove in. He was a leadoff hitter for both years, and he's driving in that many runs. That's kind of crazy. That speaks to how good our lineup is top to bottom. But yeah, I thought this was going to be a year of regression for Turner, and he definitely didn't do as good as last year, I would say. But you can't say this was a bad year by any means. He finishes with an 8 wins above replacement. That's a little bit higher than I thought. Only 0.6 below last year. And then Moncada, it seems like they must have messed with our lineup here a bit, so I'll be changing it before we start the playoffs. But we'll talk about Moncada now. He kind of just progressed normally across the board. Nothing got too crazy better. He's up to an 87. He had pretty much the exact same number of at-bats as last year. I'm sure he had more plate appearances this year, though, because he walked a lot more. Yeah, about 10. He broke his streak, though, of 144 games. He played in one less. And I don't really know how to judge this season. I would say it's kind of like Turner, where it's like it's definitely worse than last year, but like not a lot worse. His slugging percentage is down. I don't know if significantly is the right word, but enough to stand out, going from 500 down to 462. I don't know if I really see how. I guess maybe just less hits overall. Yeah, that would do it, actually. That would do it. Because you look at his power. Actually, we could just look at the ISO. That would be a much easier way to do this. Isolated power got better. That would make sense then. So that means he had more extra bases this year compared to last year, because that's what ISO is. It's like extra bases per at bat rather than slugging, which is just bases per at bat, and he just got a lot more hits last year, so that makes sense why the slugging's down. But he kind of makes up for less base hits with getting 20 more walks. The on base isn't quite where it was at last year, but the walk rate was definitely up. I mean, that's over 100 points higher from the average to the on base. He stole 24 bases, got caught 10 times. I'd like, if you're gonna get caught that many times, I'd kind of rather you just try to steal less, but it's still pretty good. I'm sure that's still positive. I don't know what goes into stolen base runs, but it's positive, so that's probably a good thing. His wins above replacement, though, did drop significantly, actually. I don't know exactly what goes into that calculation, and I'm actually kind of surprised that number would drop, because if you look at some of these rate stats, his walk percentage went up a lot, strikeout percentage went down, his at bats per home run went down, so he was hitting home runs at a faster rate. So yeah, I don't really know what contributes to a lower wins above replacement. Interesting. Then we got Luis Robert to talk about. Interesting year he had, because at the start it looked like he was gonna be making like an MVP push. Kind of tapered off. I remember he had 19 home runs at like the halfway point in the year, and then fast forward to like a month and a half, 2 months later, and he was still at 19 home runs. But he finishes with 27. He hit 11 triples and 44 doubles. So like overall, his power numbers, probably his ISO was up, or no, it was slightly lower. But overall, this season just kind of ended up being like the last two, slightly worse than the year before. And I don't know what happened to his base stealing. Only 7 steals with being caught 4 times. 7 wins above replacement for him. He actually regressed a bit at the plate. I'm assuming 95 overall is kind of where he's going to top out, because he never really got above that, even when he was playing really well. I would like to see, though, that fielding go up just one more, so he could have that diamond badge out there in center. And then we got Eloy. Look at his improvement. He went off with power. Up to 99 power against righties, and then the power against lefties goes up 10 to get up to 95. His contact didn't improve, but everything else did. I mean, the discipline up 7, the fielding up to a 62. We like that. And then it's the same story, just slightly worse than the season before. I kind of knew that the less games and less at-bats was going to happen, because last year he played a lot of games at DH, so he's just going to play more games because of how the energy works. But he still hit a lot of home runs. He probably hit homers at a faster rate, or at least a similar rate, in less at-bats to get 5 less homers. Didn't get as many hits overall. I guess it's probably better to look at more the rate stats. OPS down. He fielded better. He made less errors in a lot more innings in the field. Slightly lower wins above replacement. The walk percentage down, but is negligible. He struck out a little bit more. ISO about the same. Everything about the same. Up to a 91, and I really wonder if he's going to keep going. He's probably my number 1 priority to bring back. It's him and Moncada that are the 2 big guys to bring back, but I think if I had to choose one over the other, it'd be Eloy. Now we can talk about Shohei at the plate. If we look at his progression, or I guess regression more overall. He did regress a bit, except for that contact against lefties. And then look at the season he had at the plate. He had his best pitching and his best hitting season, when the year before he had a sub-3 ERA with 30 homers and a 300 average. He improved. He hits 10 more homers at the expense of, I guess, a couple doubles. I don't know what happened to stealing bases, but that's a shame. But his walks, that went up. Also struck out a bit more, but his average is up. His on base is up. He gets to over 1,000 OPS for the first time in his career. 1042 OPS, and he pitched 240 innings. You gotta love it, man. 6.8 wins above replacement on offense alone. So if you add that together to his pitching, that's a 13.1 wins above replacement season. That has to be a record. But yeah, just a great year out of him. Everything we could have paid for. We could have paid probably $50 million a year for him, and it still would have been worth it. And then we can talk about Sano. This would have been the Gavin Sheets spot, but we can talk about Sano next. He was more of a bench guy, but he also started against lefties. You just probably have less games where a lefty starts. And he definitely saw a hit from last season. It's tough to compare because he played so much less, so it's probably better to look at the rate stats. Lower average, slightly lower on base. OPS, decent amount lower. The wins above replacement, I mean, that's not really a rate stat, but the strikeout percentage went up a bit more. Walks were about the same. He was hitting less homers. I would say still a really good year, but this is probably more what I expected when I signed him. Like last year was just like crazy high above expectations. This year is probably more what I would have thought we signed him for. And then TA, weird season from him, man. And he's up to an 89 at 30 years old and a B potential. He goes up a ton. Plus 10 to that power against lefties. His fielding sneaks up to an 80, so he gets that gold badge now at short. Career high in homers, 28 bombs for him. He wasn't a leadoff hitter, and he wasn't a two-hole hitter against righties, so he had a very different spot in the order, and I think he kind of adapted to it, actually, because in 50-ish less at bats, he draws 5 more walks. Obviously the power shot up, less strikeouts, but the average, that just dipped to a non-Tim Anderson level there, 263. But I really can't say he did worse than last year. I really can't say that. He just did different. The OPS was higher, actually. Slightly lower wins above replacement. But yeah, the walk percentage is up over 1%. Strikeout percentage down over 1%. The ISO over 200. Much better at bats per homer. Just an interesting year. A good year. Nothing really to complain about. And then Zach Collins. What a year from him. He improves a pretty good amount too, being 29 but an A potential. But yeah, I mean, we saw the last 2 years of him as a backup just putting up these crazy numbers in small sample sizes. So it was going to be interesting to see what he did as a full-time guy. And obviously he wasn't going to do quite as good as these 2 years as a backup, but he still did pretty good. 16 bombs for him, 19 doubles, a lot of walks. The strikeouts were up a bit. I mean, at least compared to the walks. Don't really need to have him trying to steal that often. But yeah, I mean, an 877 OPS, average over 300, on base over 400, 6.4 wins above replacement. I bet he still ended up as the most valuable catcher in the league. Not a whole lot else to say about him. Just really happy with the performance from a 79 overall. And then the first guy that I'm going to be disappointed about here, Andrew Vaughn. He went up. His attributes improved. I don't know by how much, maybe 1 or 2 overall, but it was definitely his worst year. He started putting it together at the end. Like, these numbers don't look as bad as they looked for most of the year, but yeah, just all around worse. I guess the only thing he did better is he struck out way less, but the power was down, the average was down. I think he probably made a surge at the end because that average was like 250 or below for most of the year. But yeah, the slugging's way down. OPS is like 100 points worse. Only a 1 less wins above replacement though, which I feel like is kind of surprising. But the ISO below 200 by plenty. He needs to find that power stroke back next year. We need him. He needs to be an easy 25 plus home run guy. And he didn't even get to 20 this year. Over to the bench, we got Adam Engel, first to talk about. Brought him back from free agency. For a while, he was doing a lot better than I would have thought, but his numbers really fell off. I mean, to start, he had it was like a 300-ish average, I think, off the bench, but that average fell to pretty much where it was last year. He got a lot more usage just because of all the people it could have decided to DH when Shohei pitched. It picked Engel, so he hit more. Overall, I would say a worse year. I mean, the power, not like Engel's a power guy, but the slugging is not good. It's way down from an already pretty low slugging. Wow, and he actually finished with a negative WAR. I wasn't sure, but that makes sense. I mean, he's not on this team for his bat. He should never have been in the position he was in, getting that many at bats. So I can't really be too upset with it. He's really just supposed to be there as a defense and speed guy. But we can move on to somebody who I am happy with the season they put together. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, we signed him to just be kind of a utility guy. He didn't end up with as strong of numbers as he started with. I mean, he was batting like .315 for well over the first half of the year, I think. So he fell off near the end. Still put together a good year, though. It's actually interesting. I mean, I guess he did just play a lot less for us, but his slugging percentage went up a lot from a year before, and the OPS as a whole. I mean, this was his best hitting year of his career. 1.6 wins above replacement as a backup for him. Just nothing to complain about. Great year from him. And then Leury. In his final White Sox season, the longest tenured White Sox, he had the most reduced role he's had yet. I feel like every season his usage got cut like in half. Goes from being, I think we had him as a starter in year 1, to then only 75 games to now only down to 45. And he had his worst year for us. He definitely did. 264 on the average. 318 on base, the slugging way down. He did finish with a negative wins above replacement. So yeah, I guess this is the first year that Leury did Leury things. He was pretty good for us the first two. There's no better timing for that to happen because he's done. We don't have to bring him back. And then Tucker Barnhart, interesting year from him. He got sent down initially to bring Colson Montgomery up, but then we got that chance to do a player lock with him to improve his attributes. Sent Montgomery back down. He actually had a good game, so his attributes got better. Didn't play a ton, and I really don't know how the game handled it, like when Collins needed an off day, which he didn't need too many of them. He played in 134 games, but when he needed an off day, I guess the math checks out that it would have been Barnhart, so I guess Kiner-Falefa probably didn't play too many games at catcher. But in the games Barnhart played, he was fine. He's a backup catcher. You really don't need much more than this. He did perfectly okay. For a guy that I didn't even sign, the CPU was just like, you have Tucker Barnhart now and he's going to be in the bigs. He did okay. Positive wins above replacement, almost up to a 1, actually. And then lastly, we don't have to talk about him much because he didn't do much, but Colson Montgomery. I mean, in his time, he did play awful, but I think before we sent him down, he might not have even gotten a hit. So in probably his last 10 at-bats, is probably where he did just about everything here. I don't know what his role is going to be in the playoffs, if he's going to have any role. Depending on what happens with bringing back Moncada, he's either going to be a starter or he's going to be our #1 guy off the bench next year. And, you know, now that he's an A potential, 81 overall, he'll be 23 next year. He should have plenty of time to get up to that 90 overall. He'll be a good guy. He'll be a good player. I don't really know where he's going to end up being if I bring Moncada back. But that's a decision for a later date. And then we're not going to forget about him. We'll talk about Sheets. He was kind of along the Andrew Vaughn path for most of the year, but he turned it around as the year went on. He's up to an 80 overall, actually. The contact +5 both ways. He played in a couple fewer games, but he must have just gotten more starts. Less homers, though, in those at-bats. The walk rate was down, too. Average lower, on base lower, slugging lower. So, like, he had a worse year, just straight up. But not a bad year. I mean, 2.3 wins above replacement. That's probably just, like, average. He'll still be sticking around next year. And we can talk about a couple minor league guys that we didn't really check up on with throughout the year. We'll talk about Wes Kath first, who, look at his progression this year, man. He didn't have a fast track or anything like Montgomery did, and he still had very good progression, up to a 77 at 21. The difficult thing with him is going to be whether or not we can keep him in the minors next year, because I would like to, and then end up doing something similar to Montgomery, where hopefully he gets a fast track, and then we can bump that potential up to an A, but that would probably probably mean having to sign enough people in the offseason that are over a 77 so that he doesn't automatically get brought up. We're gonna have to see how it works. We're gonna have to see how the offseason shapes up. But honestly, if he got called up right now, he would probably do fine. He's gonna be good. We also got Micah Adolfo finally having a good progression year. He's only up to a 73 though, so I doubt the CPU would bring him up on his own, but he's kind of become a pretty solid player if you look at the attributes. All the hitting where it's at, the fielding solid. Definitely could be someone I would be okay with trading if that were to happen, if that popped up. And then one of the more surprising minor league progressions of the season was Jose Ruiz. Look at him, up to a 76. With how I assume our offseason's gonna turn out, I would not be surprised if he ends up on our big league bullpen next year. You can't see it now because it's into the AAA postseason stats, but I remember looking at him. Well, I guess if it was a month to go in our season, it was near the end of the AAA year. But in AAA, he had over 50 saves, an ERA under 1. So he was unhittable in AAA. So yeah, he got a lot better. 76 overall. That's better than Christian Javier right now by plenty. So yeah, don't be shocked if he factors into our plans next year. The other guys, Matt Foster, pretty much a similar situation as Ruiz. He just didn't have quite the same progression, but he's looking decent now, a 73. I just don't know how much longer he has to continue to progress. Same thing with Ryan Burr. It's like all three of those guys are in the same boat. It's just Ruiz kind of broke out from that a bit this year. There's also Romy Gonzalez, who when I was checking in on him, his progression was actually better than it is here. So he must have tapered off because he kind of lost that a bit. But with where he was at, if he kept up that pace, he probably could have been on our team next year. It would have been nice to just have him ready to go to be our Larry next year, but now without him progressing as much as it looked like he would, I don't know if he's going to get to that point. And then just checking in with a couple more long-term guys. If this March to October goes long enough, we got Phil Marks, solid year progression for him, 19 years old, 68 overall. It's still going to be plenty of time before he becomes anything. We also got Russell Deal. He's a little older, same overall. A good progression this year though, so if he does that again, he could get up to being a guy we consider in the not too distant future. Give him 3 years. Oh, and then I completely forgot about Matthew Thompson. I don't think I ever said it in a video, but he was in single A all year. I remember I was wondering during one of the Bundy moments why we didn't get the chance to progress Matthew Thompson, but I didn't even realize it was because he was in single A. They finally promoted him to double A. He's up to a 75. He'll definitely have another season where he's not going to be in consideration for a big league team, but now that he's finally not in single A, maybe we'll actually get a chance to use him in a fast track or something. But I think that's about it for what we need to look at today. And man, I think I went more overboard than I normally do. I'm sitting here, the recording time says 1 hour and 8 minutes, and I don't know how much editing is gonna do to fix that. So if you guys stuck around this long, if there's anybody that did, I really think the only thing I have to say is sorry. Next episode is gonna be the start of the postseason. We get our chance at retribution against the Astros after knocking us out in the first season. So guys, make sure, if you stuck around to this point, you gotta hit that like button for me, right? You have to. Nobody that's still watching by now hasn't hit the subscribe button, but if you somehow are not subscribed and you're here, how are you not already subscribed to my channel? Hit that button there, man. Get us to 900. But with that is where this episode ends. Thank you guys all for watching today. Thanks for stopping by, although I guess I can't really consider it stopping by when it lasted this long, but I will see you in the next one.